All right, everyone. First of all, thanks for joining in. If you're joining in live, and if you're looking at this later, thanks for that as well. So this is my first ever live stream that I'm going to be doing on a slightly different topic. Normally, most of you who follow me on LinkedIn, Twitter, YouTube, whatever, typically see me doing a lot of security related content, especially around live streams and so on. But today I'm going to be doing something different. I'm going to be using my time here to actually build out some stuff with AI and LLMs, right? So LLMs, unless you've been hiding under a rock, LLMs have become a very important part of our lives. And we've been using AI for a lot of different things, from building chatbots to, again, terms of enhancing business applications, and so on and so forth. And one of the ways in which a lot of companies or a lot of individuals use LLMs is with agents. So agents are basically, you could call them in a very simplified way. You could call agents workflows that you can build with AI, right, or with LLMs. So the idea is that you want certain things to be done by the LLMs, or do this and then do this, and step by step state machines type workflows. You can use agents or agent frameworks to be able to achieve this. Now, today I'm going to be actually building something that I need personally for myself, for my own business, which is AppSec Engineer, and I need something that I need from my own business, and I'm going to be building something with agents for this, right? I'm going to be building this with agents. I'm going to be using three different ways. So there are very popular agent frameworks. There's LangChain. There's LangGraph, which is there from LangChain. There is CrewAI. There is Autogen. There is Agency-Swarm. There are lots of different frameworks that you can use to do things like this. Now, I'm going to be doing a smackdown between three major frameworks that I have known of and that are very popular all over the world. One is, of course, CrewAI. One is Autogen from Microsoft, and one that I recently discovered, Agency-Swarm. So I'm going to be using all these three to do the same task, and we're going to build it out from scratch. Now, granted, I know a little bit about CrewAI. I know a little bit about Agency-Swarm. I know very little about Autogen, so I'm going to have to figure out Autogen from scratch. So this is me just building out AI agents using these three frameworks. We'll discover the pitfalls, the good things, the bad things. We'll look at all these things as I go into building this with these frameworks. So if you want to, feel free to chat and engage on the chat. I'm always here. Let me know if you need something or if you have a question somewhere in the middle, and I'll answer it. The idea is I'm just going to build this from scratch. I don't have while I know CrewAI and I know Agency-Swarm a little bit, I don't exactly have, I wouldn't consider myself an expert in both these things. I have some level of expertise, but obviously not enough to be called, I know this entirely. I know a few things that you can do with this, but I'm going to essentially use whatever little I know. We'll build on top of whatever little I know, and we can learn things together. So that's basically what I'm going to be doing today. So with that, I am going to push all of you to the side monitor here, and I'm going to open up my screen, and we're going to start coding. So the first thing I'm going to do is I am going to start sharing my screen, and we're going to essentially start building this out. And as soon as I start having to share my screen, my item needs to update for some reason. Just install and relaunch. Let's get started with sharing my screen. Just give me a sec while I do this. All right. So this is not a very nice view. This is a better view, I guess. Yes, that's a much better view. All right. So what I'm going to do now is the first thing. So I'm going to be building a single requirement that I need for myself. Okay. So let's talk about the business use case first, and then look at how I'm going to be building it in three different frameworks. One is CrewAI, one is Autogen, and one is Agency-Swarm, right? So I already know which one I think will do this better, and I'm not going to reveal that till the very end. So if you're interested, stick to the very end. So the business case, or the thing I want to do, or the thing I want to achieve with this particular example is that as part of AppSec Engineer, most of you know me as the founder of AppSec Engineer. As part of AppSec Engineer, we build a lot of vulnerable applications and vulnerable environments. So and we usually use the concept of stories to build out these vulnerable applications or vulnerable environments. So I want to create a story generator or a specification generator that would help me make this possible, right? That would help me make this happen for myself. So I want to be able to generate these vulnerable applications, or at least vulnerable stories or vulnerable story specifications for intentionally vulnerable applications that I can use to create intentionally vulnerable labs on AppSec. That's basically what I'm trying to do here. All right. So with that in mind, let's get started. So I'm going to open up my directory here. I'm going to call this live stream vulnerable apps. So let's just call this live stream vulnerable apps. And I'm going to create another application or create another directory called CrewAI vuln apps, which is the first framework I'm going to take up is CrewAI. And let me explain what CrewAI does for those of you who are not familiar, and we'll get into it very quickly. So I'm going to open up this in Cursor. I'm going to be using Cursor to write my application. And let's first look at CrewAI in terms of its documentation and all of that stuff, right? So CrewAI is a very popular framework. I love it personally. I love, entered the wrong. So CrewAI, right? So CrewAI is probably one of the most popular frameworks that you can use to write agents. Now, the reason why CrewAI is popular, and I think why it became so popular all over, first of all, their lead developer, I don't know how to pronounce his name properly, but their lead developer is an absolute beast. He's working all the time. He's fixing PRs. He's documenting really well. The project on the open source front is a top-notch project. I have no complaints there. It's an awesome project. They really do well. They're also, one of the reasons why CrewAI also is very popular, in my opinion, is because CrewAI actually makes it really easy for you to get started with doing this. Most other frameworks kind of make you learn a lot of stuff and a lot of boilerplate. CrewAI also has some boilerplate that you need to do, but it makes it very easy for you to go through it. So you have a lot of, first of all, their docs are great, their examples are great. So they have a lot of these examples that you can use for you to be able to use CrewAI. You can create your agent frameworks and so on and so forth very easily with CrewAI. I personally like it a lot, and I started using this quite extensively. I've used this in a couple of production use cases as well. And yeah, I mean, I have run into issues in a couple of times, but it's actually been pretty good by and large, right? Now, the reason why CrewAI also, I think, works really well is because, one, it integrates almost seamlessly into the LangChain ecosystem. So I'm not going to get into too much detail about the LangChain ecosystem. LangChain is basically a library or a set of libraries that can help you simplify your programming or your writing code with LLMs or writing integrations on top of LLMs. With LangChain, you can build out tools, which is basically things that you can interact with other APIs for, which you can use function calling and interact with other APIs for. You can talk to different LLMs, like you can talk to OpenAI, you can talk to Google Gemini, you can talk to multiple AIs. You can look at LangChain documentation. You can also use LangChain for retrieval augmented generation use cases where you want to be able to load a custom knowledge base into some kind of a vector database, and then we use that to actually do similarity searches or vector searches, whatever it is that you want to do. LangChain can be used for that as well. LangChain recently also has its own agent framework called LangGraph. I think it's called LangGraph. So LangGraph, yeah. So this is another framework that you can use for building agents on top of LangChain. Now, I'm not essentially going to show you this exact example simply because I'm not covering LangGraph today. LangGraph is much larger, and I don't have any concept of LangGraph at all. I've used it in a couple of cases, but I think it takes a little bit of time, and I'm not interested in going through that. I'm going through three of the frameworks that I particularly use quite a bit, or at least I intend to use quite a bit: CrewAI, Autogen, and of course, Agency-Swarm. Now, let's start with our CrewAI example first. Now, what we want to do, like I said, is we want an agent to generate some stories or specifications for vulnerable applications, right? And it needs to give us not only the story and specification, it also needs to give us some example code and code snippets and so on. So it should be more than just vulnerable application story generator. It needs to help me actually create an actual spec for that application. And remember, when you're creating an intentionally vulnerable application, it needs to have very specific things. It needs to have a specific vulnerability being showcased. It needs to have some kind of a storyline, some kind of a theme. It should be a bookstore app or something that's simple. It should not be too complicated. I can't build Amazon, obviously, to showcase a single vulnerability. I need to showcase something very simple, like a forum or a simple search application or whatever it is, right? So that being said, that's what I want to do, and I want to generate this using an agent framework. The reason I choose to use an agent framework is simply because I can program different agents or different assistants to do this job, and they will hopefully be able to help me get the job done, right? So that's basically what I want to do here. All right. So with this in mind, let's start building with CrewAI. So the first thing I want to do is I want to set up a virtual environment. I want to be using UV. I'm not sure if anyone uses UV. I think it's really nice because it's easy to manage and it's much faster in terms of installing Python dependencies. So I want to install UV pip, install CrewAI, OpenAI to start with. I think this is good enough. I also need CrewAI tools. Now, if you want to use tools, which is why you want to build agents, right? If you want to use tools, you can use tools from CrewAI. Now, with CrewAI, you will essentially you can use toolkits from either Crew's own toolkits, or you can use LangChain tools. So it kind of extends the LangChain ecosystem pretty nicely. So you'll see that CrewAI has its own bunch of tools that it's written. It could be code search or it could be what have you. It has a whole bunch of tools that you can look for. So it has a PDF search tool, it has a web search tool, it has all of that. It also has an Exa tool. I'm going to be using Exa today quite a bit. So definitely this is something that I'm going to find very useful to use. Now let's actually, install that. So one of the things, to give you an example to tell you why you needed a tool, right? Now, an LLM is only able to generate text or generate images or whatever, right? It cannot actually interact with things unless you use function calling. And OpenAI gives you function calling. And just to set the context very clearly, we're going to be using OpenAI throughout. So OpenAI allows you to allows something called function calling, where based on the generated output of the LLM, it can call a function that can do something, right? It can either get the weather for a particular place or call this particular tool and search for something on the internet, whatever. Right? This is something that you can do with tools. So the idea is that you have agents who can talk to different tools, and these tools do different things, right? So this is really what we want in our example as well. So along with that, we need to install CrewAI tools. This is something that we want to do. And you'll see that CrewAI tools installs a whole bunch of tools. It also installs LangChain and LangChain's tools as well. I am not a huge fan of this approach simply because it installs a lot of packages. And I've installed it inside that. Oh, that's fine. Great. So I've installed all these tools, and let's get started with actually building some agents for building or to come up with our stories and specifications for our intentionally vulnerable apps, right? So now, let's call this vulnagent.py, and let's actually close this out, right? So from crew import, from CrewAI import crew, we need agent. We need what else? What else do we need? We need task, and we need process. Okay. We also need to import OS because we need it, and we also need the .env library. So what we do need is this. Okay, let's see what we've installed here. Okay, I'm not sure whether we actually installed things that we need. Don't think we installed it in that virtual env. So let's actually reinstall it. uv pip install CrewAI, OpenAI, CrewAI tools, and python.env. So it's installing all the libraries we need. For some reason, I'd forgotten to do that against the virtual env. So this, as you can see, it installs a whole bunch of libraries. I'm not a huge fan of this approach simply because a lot of these libraries I'm never going to use. So things like it installs Kubernetes, for instance. It installs a whole bunch of Google Cloud libraries. I'm never going to use that. I don't like packages installing a whole bunch of unnecessary packages. I wish they went a little bit more modular. But apparently they don't. So once you install the CrewAI tools, you're just getting the whole 9 yards, whatever they have, right? So this is, a negative point as far as CrewAI is concerned, and you'll see this very commonly with all these frameworks as well. It's not necessarily that they just install a whole bunch of things. They don't allow you to selectively call what you want, which agency framework allows you to do, Agency-Swarm allows you to do, by the way, which is, I like that. I really appreciate that. So let's actually wait for it to install. It's installing something that is a CPython extension, so it's probably going to take some time. But nevertheless, let's actually figure out what we want to do and start getting to it, right? So now we are going to do a few things. We're going to import we need an OpenAI key, obviously, and we're going to use that. I think we should find this in some place. So let me just check whether a particular location has that key, and then just import or pull that key into this. So it should be in. I need an OpenAI key, so that's what I'm doing here. Actually, I know where it is. Great. This is going to be in. Perfect. So this, we already have an OpenAI key. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to copy the OpenAI key to, and you're not seeing this, I'm just doing this off screen. Sorry about that. I don't want people accessing my key, obviously. But this is, what I'm doing is I'm just copying this into to live stream CrewAI. So I just copied my environment file. So hopefully we should have our environment set up. You'll see that there's an environment here. This is for some reason still installing and downloading something which is taking forever. But nevertheless, let me actually get started. So let's look at our task that we want to do, right? So let's start off with the task that we want to do. We want to essentially build an agent or a set of agents that will generate stories and specifications for intentionally vulnerable applications. Now this essentially means that the first agent can be a manager agent if you want. So you can have a manager agent to be your first agent, or you can just have an agent that reads some specification and get started. Let's actually build it out with a manager agent. It can be a manager agent. So this will be like an agent that will orchestrate all the other agents, right? So the manager agent will be a hierarchical agent. So the instruction first goes to the manager agent, and then the manager agent starts to distribute these instructions to the others. So the first agent will be a manager agent who handles all communications, right? Who handles communications with underlying agents. The next agent will be second agent will be a search agent or a vulnerability researcher agent. Now this agent, what they're going to do is we're going to use a search engine called EXA. So think of Google, but more optimized for AI related use cases. We're going to use EXA. So we'll use EXA to identify research and come up with intentional vulns and stories, right? So all of that's a story specifications. The third agent will be someone who writes the research from the second agent, who writes the research from the second agent into a file in Markdown. So we are going to have three agents. The first agent is going to be the manager agent. The second agent is going to be this vulnerability researcher. The third agent is going to be somebody who does this, right? So this is what we want from our crew, right? This is what we want from our crew, and this is really what we want to get started with. Okay, so we've imported a couple of these things. We're going to get started with actually our code. Now, the thing with CrewAI, and you'll see with CrewAI, you need to create agents and tasks. Okay, so you need to create agents and tasks, and that's really what you need to do. So the first thing you need to do is start to declare agents, right? So let's call this manager, and we're going to call this agent a manager, and this agent essentially has a role called manager. Let's just call the manager. You need to also declare something called a goal for each agent, right? So I'm going to say is responsible to communicate with all the other agents and provide detailed instructions for them to work on. It's unnecessarily verbose maybe, but that's fine. Backstory, you can give them a backstory, and I think you should. I think it's mandatory that you give them a backstory. So if you look at the agent, you'll actually see that they need to have a role, a goal, a backstory. They can also have additional things like a config, whatever. You can do all of those things, right? So we are also going to do another thing, which is going to be, we are going to declare an LLM that we want to use, right? So we're going to say we're going to be able to set CrewAI LLMs. So let's actually look at how we can set the LLM. Chat open again. This I don't remember the exact. Yeah, connection OpenAI, CrewAI. Okay, chat OpenAI. Okay, this is cool. Okay, so we are going to do is from LangChain _ OpenAI import chat OpenAI, and we're going to set up our GPT-4. Let's just call this our LLM. That's the way I'm just declaring the library, right? The name of the variable. So chat OpenAI. I'm just going to give it a model. Is this a model name? Just a model. I don't think you need a name. I'm just going to give GPT-4o because I don't want to use any other type of model. And the API key, I'm just going to pull from this. So I'm going to say from .env import load .env, and we're going to load this here. And this is going to be API key. We're going to say os.env. This is perfect. Great. So I think we almost have everything that we need installed as part of this. So the backstory is that you can give it, you are a manager in a security research organization. You are responsible for creating vulnerable applications for educational purposes. Perfect. you have a team of researchers and writers who will help you build the task. This is great. This is why you have GitHub Copilot. You need to communicate and provide them detailed instructions. You can give them the vulnerable application, let's call this vulnerable applications, need to be web applications that demonstrate a specific vulnerability, and each application needs to have a simple set of functionalities and simple UI. Okay, so this is what you have just created as a backstory, right? So you've created this as the backstory. Let's actually go ahead and get started with, so we've got this agent. We're also going to make this verbose. So we want to see each run of what the agent is doing. We're going to set that to true. And the other thing that we're going to do is we are going to set the LLM to our LLM. So we want it to specifically use GPT-4o. I don't know what it uses by default, but I want it to use GPT-4o because GPT-4o is pretty good for these use cases and pretty cheap. So GPT-4o is, I think, half the cost of GPT-4 Turbo. So it's pretty cheap. So we have a manager agent. Now we are going to create our one researcher agent, right? Now this agent essentially has a role for, so this, I think we've already got some boilerplate coming up. So you're a vulnerability researcher, so you're identifying, researching, coming up with intentionally, this is wrong, we probably have to fix this. Responsible for, coming up with intentionally vulnerable web applications for educational purposes. Let's just make that. Intentionally vulnerable web applications for educational purposes. Okay, you're a vulnerability researcher, you're responsible in searching, identifying, researching, and coming up with intentionally vulnerable web applications for educational purposes. Again, with, all right. So you have to get detailed instructions. You have to use XR to identify intentional vulnerabilities, coming up with stories and detailed specifications for these intentionally vulnerable applications. Okay. Again, I'm not following a very good Python code formatting. My apologies. But just to give you an idea, this is what we're trying to do here. So this, we'll also add another thing. So these intentionally vulnerable web applications need to have simple functionality with UIs being rendered from server-side templates. We don't want UIs being rendered with React.js and all that stuff. Server-side templates. That's it. We just want very simple applications that are rendered from server-side templates. So the idea is that it chooses frameworks, whatever. Hopefully it can do that. Right? And now, so this is the second agent that we have. Now remember, this agent is not going to do its job unless we have an EXA. So one of the things I mentioned was that we are going to be using EXA, which is a search engine for this. So let's figure out how we can use EXA for this particular use case, right? So EXA is a tool that allows you to, let's actually see what you can do with EXA. So CrewAI tools clearly has the ability to use EXA. CrewAI tools. So let's see whether they have an EXA tool. I think they did. EXA tool. So essentially, CrewAI tools, import EXA search tool, and you can essentially set your environment variable, your API key, blah, blah, blah. I already have a API key on EXA. I'm just going to use the same thing. So this seems simple enough. You should just be able to use this tool right out of the bat, right? So I'm just going to say from CrewAI _ tools import XR search tool. Great. Search tool. Let's call this XR search tool, and we're going to have to get an API key. We don't have it yet. Let's actually go to xr.ai, get our API key again. I just want to, I'm doing this off screen. I use XR myself, so I don't want to, I want to just make sure that I don't. So I'm just going to do this offline. Just give me a second. I'm just writing the echo XR API key to this to oh shoot. Okay, just give me a second. Yeah, okay, we got this done. So the XR thing is installed. Just a second. Okay, so we have XR installed now. I mean, the XR API key is put in. Like I said, I've done that off screen. So just making sure that we have both these things, right? So we have the API, we have XR search tool. This is going to use that. So we're going to say tools. We're going to say, I want you to use the search tool. We just want it to use the search tool. We don't need to have any other tool being used by the vulnerability researcher. Finally, we have the vulnerability writer, right? So this person essentially writes the research from the vulnerability researcher into a file in Markdown. Now we need to use a different tool for this. Obviously, the AI can't just reach into our file system and do things with it. So we need so from CrewAI _ tools import file read. Do we have a file write? I think we do. I don't remember there being a file write tool. I think I've used it. I've used a file write tool or file read tool for sure. File read, directory read. Okay. There was definitely a file write. I'm just trying to see if I have a file write. Or can we use the LangChain ones to do this? Just give me a second. Let me just figure out from their documentation, file write, file read. It seems to have a file read tool, but it doesn't have a file write tool. Does it have a shell tool? Maybe we can write it to a shell. Not the best tool to use, but nevertheless, let's actually see if it has a shell tool. LangChain should have a file write tool, so we should be able to use it. LangChain file write file system. There should be a tool for LangChain file. Yeah, this is the tool. I have not had a great deal of success with this tool, but we don't need a file write. Actually, we don't need a file write because Crew has an output file tool built in, so you don't need to have a file write. So that's great. So we have an agent, we have verbose, we've set all of this stuff. Actually, we don't need this at all. We don't need this third agent at all. We don't need this agent simply because this agent is going to be able to spit out an output file, and that output file will have whatever we need. So that is going to come in our tasks. We don't need this third agent at all, which is quite convenient. So that's less work for us to do. So the first agent is our manager. The second agent is our vulnerability researcher. The third agent is nobody right now because we don't need somebody to write this. So if you look at our agent, you won't be able to describe it here, but when you actually get into the next step, you're going to be able to describe this. So let's actually do the manage task, which is basically a manager's task, right? So the next thing you have to do in Crew is once you declare your agent, you have to declare tasks for that agent to do, right? So that's what's going to happen. So we're going to have to declare tasks for that agent to do. So Crew essentially has a format where you can use it for, you can use it for tasks. You have a certain set of parameters that it accepts. So you can just see description, expected results, agent. You can use you can use the search tool, whatever tools you want. And you can also give it additional parameters. You can give it output file, which is what I'm intending to do. It can output JSON, it can output Pydantic, it can output whatever you want. So I am going to give it a specific, output file, and I'm also going to use the context parameter in a little bit. So let's first do this, right? So this is going to be the thing that we're going to be using first is here to task description expected output. Okay, task. So it says manage. All right, that's funny. All right, so let's look at the task. So this is basically generate. I don't know whether a manage thing actually is required here, but nevertheless, generate detailed instructions for the security researcher to follow. Okay. Actually, do we need an expected output? I'm not sure. I am not sure if we need an expected output at all. Let's just keep it without an expected output, or is that a mandatory thing? Expected output. Okay, expected output, clear definition of the task outcome. We just need, I guess, this seems to be a mandatory field. So Pydantic has declared this is a mandatory field. So let's just do that. So expected outcome, detailed instructions for the security researcher to follow. This is not ideal. This is unnecessarily me having to write these instructions that don't make much sense. And this kind of is necessary because when you have to prompt this, the manager has to, especially when you start getting more complex workflows, the manager just needs to get these random kind of these very, very high level instructions that you need for this to work. So that is one. So we have this, we have, you don't have the config. We don't need to care about that. We don't care about, we need the agent, obviously. So we need the agent, which is your, just the agent, no agents. Is this a attribute, which is agent? Yeah, this is just the one agent, which is your manager agent. And we also need a verbose. Do we have a verbose parameter? I don't think it is there. We also need the output. We don't need an output in this case. The output is absolutely nothing in this particular case. What else do we need? I'm just trying to figure out if there are some things that we may be missing here for us to be able to work with our agent, our tasks correctly. We don't need anything from the first one. The first one is kind of basic. There's nothing fancy here. All right, expected output tools, context, nothing, really nothing else here. The agent has also been set pretty clearly. All right, so now let's go to the next one, which is research task, which is we have, is this, description. This is the wrong, okay. So this is going to be, I think we'll have to write a pretty detailed description here. Identify and come up with intentionally vulnerable, come up with stories and specifications. So we want to do this. We want to get stories and specifications for intentionally vulnerable web applications, right? That's what we want in this particular case. So we want expected outcome stories and specifications for intentionally vulnerable web applications based on the manager's instructions and input. So let's just say that, right? That's what we want. So we also need to give it a context this time around because the manager needs to give us some context. The context comes from the managed task. So whatever the managed task does, we need the context. The agent needs to be this. The vulnerability researcher needs to be the agent. We also need to have an output file. This is important because we want vuln app story.md. So let's just capture it like that, right? This is not ideal. I mean, not the best way to do things, in my opinion, simply because you can have multiple ways of doing this, but you can use file read, file write, and I should be able to randomize the name of the file. Maybe I can pass in some attributes, but right now, let's just keep it simple. Let's not try and think of too many different edge cases here. So we have this task. We've got this. We have created our agents. We have created our tasks. We have created all of this stuff. We have added our XR tool. XR tool has been added to the agent here. In this particular case, we have all of these things done. Now we need to figure out how do we kick off this, and that is really where we want to put in some input for this, right? So we should be able to provide some input for this to work. Okay. So actually, this may be something that we might need to use with a file reader agent. So let's do that. Instead of having this manager, let's have the manager figure out the file reader agent, right? Use the file reader agent. So from CrewAI underscore tools, import file read tool. So reader is equal to file read tool, and we can have a path. Let's just have a file underscore path. Let's read instructions.md. So here I'm just going to hard code some instructions for the manager to follow. And based on this, the manager should typically be able to get this job done, right? So I'm not sure why this is still not done installing, or has it finished installing? Very strange. Just open up a new terminal. I don't know what just happened here. Just crashed on me, I guess. All right, so we have this. We have it's. I also need to change the config here to use the file read tool. It needs to read that instruction. So tools, it's going to have to read the reader tool. So it's going to get the instructions from here. The input instructions are going to come from here. The manager is going to take this. It's going to process it, do whatever they need to do in order to figure this out. So we're going to say crew, and we're going to declare a crew. We're going to have agents and tasks. And we are also going to have the process. We have to declare how we want the crew to be processed. And this is an important thing, right? So how do you want it to be processed? You want it sequential? You want it hierarchical? So I'm going to say process is equal to process dot sequential. And is that something that is there? Okay, this is there. But this is correct. Okay, so this is properly declared, and we also want it to be verbose. Again, these are all Pydantic base models, which is great. Verbose, we don't want any config. We don't. You can have a prompt file, but we are actually using our file reader to pass inputs into that, so we don't really care about it too much. We don't have callback tasks. We don't have any of that stuff to be done. So we just want verbose, and we want the verbose to be set to a number. I think this is the slight inconsistency that I've always had with Crew. Is verbose a number, or is verbose a true false? Let me actually check. I don't want to. Okay, verbose can be true. Okay, verbose is true. Okay, it's pretty simple. All right. So we have process sequential, verbose true, and this, right? So we're going to do crew.kickoff. Is it kickoff or kick underscore off? Okay, it is kickoff. Okay, then we're going to print, we're going to get the result. This is what I generally do. So I'm just going to say print result. Okay, So hopefully it's all working fine. Right. So we need pip uv pip install CrewAI. Let's just install it again. I don't know whether it's not been installed properly. It's very strange that it didn't install correctly at all last time. This is why I don't like these many dependencies in a single package. It's just absolutely unnecessary to have these many dependencies for something that uses like 1/10 of them or less than 1/10 of them. It seems wasteful. It's installing Boto Core, James Path. Why does it need Boto Core and James Path? Just give me a minute, folks. Unfortunately, it's taking a little bit of time. This is what I don't like about most of these LangChain supporting tools. Then this is something you'll see even with this and with Autogen. There's a lot of different things that you need to do with. You need to install a whole bunch of packages. A lot of it is unnecessary and never gets used. I wish they had made it more modular, and that would be great. And there are a lot of dependency mismatches that happen. So, that is definitely a problem that we have. Okay, so this is installed, pip install. Let's see, install CrewAI tools. I think it's already installed. Let me try again. That seems to have been installed. Most of it seems to have been installed, but last time we did run into issues with one of the, yeah, this is the problem. This was where it kind of failed, but let's see whether it did. Yeah, this is terrible. This sort of stuff is painful to work with. I'm just gonna see if I can just leave this without having to install it. I guess it's installed in essential tools, and we're not calling most of these, so maybe it should be fine. And OpenAI, I guess it should already have been installed. All right, so let's actually go ahead and run this. I'm going to run this on a separate terminal simply because I think it's a little easier. Okay, now let's see whether those dependencies have actually caused problems for us. So now we are running our agent, and hopefully this should have started. Yeah, this is the problem. Okay, validation description. I think there's some mistake here somewhere. Description expected outcome. Something wrong with that. Something wrong with that function. Something with the tasks. Let me see. Description expected output. Yeah, that seems to be fine. Expected output, description, expected outcome. Oh God. This is why the Copilot sometimes is a gigantic pain. All right. So hopefully this should start. Oops, again, another issue. Human input. What's up with this? Let me just run it from here and see what I'm not able to debug very well. Okay, input should be a valid dictionary of a task model type. Human input. context. Should I load context again? I'm making a whole bunch of mistakes in the tasks. I think the context is a list. Oh yes, this is a list. That is the problem. This needs to be in a list. This is the bug. Yeah, so seems to have entered the crew. So you'll see that what's happening now is that, oh, there's no instructions.md. I need to add an instruction for this. I forgot to do that. Shoot. Here you go. Instructions.md. Now, okay, so let's actually give it some kind of work to do. So generate a generate a story and detailed specification for a intentionally vulnerable file, a vulnerable application, demonstrating SSRF in a Java Spring Boot application. So this is the instructions that I'm giving it. Let's see whether it actually takes it. Since our file was not found, hopefully it should read the file and then start. So it did read the file. So this is the file reader one. So now you'll see that the manager essentially delegates this task, right? So yeah, so you see that this is basically the agency working like it's supposed to work, right? So generate a story based on detailed specification. It says this context. We need to create a vulnerable web application to demonstrate specific vulnerability, in this case SSRF. This is what the manager is doing. And you'll see that the manager is taking these instructions and passing it off to the next agent, which is our search agent. The search agent is looking at EXA, and it's basically searching all through EXA and coming up with different search results from EXA. Remember, EXA is a search engine that we're using. So EXA is what it's using for this particular search result. And based on what it finds from EXA, the research agent should be able to compile a bunch of a specific story, etc. So you see that it's actually creating this application with Java Spring Boot. It's actually giving it some detailed overview. It's, just input a URL, simple page with a form allowing users to input a URL, Java's technology stack, Java 11, Spring Boot, Timeleaf, Maven. Vulnerable code implementation is actually doing a pretty good job with vulnerable code implementation from the looks of it. It's giving some exploitation information, some mitigation information, and all of this stuff, right? It should have written this. So it's actually written, it should have, it's generating this as Smackdown. And if we're lucky and if everything has gone right, it should, yeah, so I think it should have, oh, it's still not. So it's reusing the same thing. It's running through the same instructions again to provide detailed instruction specification. Reuse the same. I don't know why it's going into the same loop again. This should not have to be the case. Delegation should not be okay. Caught in the repetitive loop. Yeah, it seems to have been caught in the repetitive loop. This is something that I don't like. Again, with certain agency frameworks, they hallucinate sometimes, especially because you have this particular manager agent and the manager agent passing off things to the other agent, which is how it's supposed to work. But sometimes it will constantly, it actually did a pretty good job in the first pass, but maybe we need to allow delegation or deny delegation or something like that. And maybe then it'll work just fine. So see, this is also expensive, right? When you have CrewAI or any of these things going into this constant repetitive search loop or a loop of instructions that you need, it ends up going back to the LLM every single time to generate for every single instruction. And since it does that, it should, yeah, so it seems to have finally figured out that it went into a loop. and then it came up with some responses, and it's come up with the project structure. This is pretty good. And has it written it to a file, vulnap story? That's what's remaining. That's the last thing it needs to do. So this is what is written. It's finished the chain. Hopefully, it should have written all this to our file, because that's what we want. We want all of this to be written to a file. And that's the end goal of the whole thing. So the output file should be, yes, it's written it. And yeah, so it's clearly written the example. Let's actually see how good it is. Just put this in here. You need to create a story, server-side request forgery. Oh, shoot. Again, as soon as I click it, it goes away. The preview goes away. It's kind of weird. Okay, technology stack implementation details will include a feature that allows users to input a URL, which is the server that focuses on the results. Blah, 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 blah. It gives you the SSRF vulnerable application. It gives you the controller. It gives you the code for this. So it actually pretty much gives you the necessary code for a lot of this stuff, right? So it takes the fetch URL, it takes this and just gives you a HTTP response fetch, index.html. So it actually gives you, and it doesn't give you a very good story. Maybe I should have specified it a little bit more in the prompts. But it actually gives you, it does a pretty good job of capturing the URL, the actual requirement that we have. Steps to run the application, you just do this, Maven install, correct on most fronts. I'm sure there'll be issues when we try and just run this, just copy paste this and run this. You have to do a little bit of work extra there to make sure it works. This is not a fully coded application, right? It just is some basic code that gives you pointers to what you can do. But this is pretty good because it gives you a lot of, it gives me, I build a lot of these vulnerable applications, gives me a lot of, gives me a point at which I can start and get to it pretty quickly without wasting too much time. So mitigation strategies, it didn't give me a secure version. So actually I should have made that in the instructions pretty clear. I need a secure version and an insecure version. So I didn't make that very clear. So maybe that's why I didn't get it to work as well as I could. So that's something that you have. All right. So this is CrewAI. So we got this actually done with CrewAI. We took almost an hour to get this done. And I'm going to move on to the other one. I don't have that much time to do this. So I'm going to move on to, instead of doing a Smackdown between 3, I'm probably going to have to do a Smackdown between 2 and probably keep the third one for the next one. It took more time than I imagined just to set this up. The things, the good things, let's do the good things, the bad things between CrewAI and, or what I saw with CrewAI and not with CrewAI. We'll look at the other thing later on. But with CrewAI, one of the things that I saw that I like is obviously the fact that it's easy, right? You have tools built in, you have a lot of the boilerplate that you can just get. It's a little less boilerplate. From what I've heard, it's a little less boilerplate than Autogen. Autogen is supposed to have a lot more boilerplate. Autogen also does pretty much the same thing with Crew, except, and it uses LangChain. It has all of those things. Crew kind of makes it easy in some ways because you have very strictly defined agent structures, you have very strictly defined task structures, all of those things are there. But the thing that I found with Crew is that it kind of has the same downsides to a lot of this as LangChain and some of these things have, because a lot of things are installed. Again, it goes into the loop because you really can't control the underlying prompt for the agency, right? You don't control the underlying prompt for the agency. That is still managed by Crew. You just have some basic information that it is concatenating, I think, as a prompt, and that's how it's doing what it's doing. Again, this is what I think. I've not studied the code in detail to tell you exactly that it's happening. But if you look at it, it runs into this loop a whole bunch of times. And from what I think, based on the usage that I have, I think it has used quite a bit of money from my OpenAI budget. Yeah, I think it has. So I think it's used a decent amount of money for this to do this pretty simple job. And I've seen this in the past as well. But it's good because, again, it's easy to work with. It's got the tools, it's got all that stuff. So it's pretty straightforward. It's also a good starter to begin with. and I think it'll start to become a little more complicated in production, especially when you have a lot of different agents and tasks doing a lot of different things. But I think overall, this is a useful tool to have, and it's done the job reasonably well. I wish I had added a little bit more instructions in terms of I want a secure version as well, but I didn't. That's my fault. That's on me. But in this case, I think it's done a pretty decent job. So I think that is pretty nice. All right, let's move on to our next one. I don't know if you have any comments. I'm not sure how many of you are. I see a lot of people watching, but I don't know on which channel, so not sure if you have comments. But if you do have comments and questions, please go ahead and ask. So I'm going to move on to the next one. So I'm going to deactivate this, and I'm going to go to Agency-Swarm. I think this is faster. EXPS. Let's just call this, right? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to open up Cursor as usual, and this time around, what I'm going to do, not this, I'm just going to go into that directory and get this done. Hold on. CD Agency-Swarm experiments, Cursor. All right. So now we're going to look at another framework, and this is a different agent framework called Agency-Swarm. Now, Agency-Swarm is pretty cool because I think it solves a lot of the problems that Crew does not, and Crew and even Autogen and some of these other frameworks do not. First of all, Agency-Swarm is much more lightweight, simply because it doesn't install all these unnecessary packages and stuff like that. Agency-Swarm also has a very opinionated way of dealing with tools. So what they do is they don't give you the tools, you have to write your own tools. But the good thing about doing that is it gives you very strict type checking inside the tool. It's much more it's much more powerful, in my opinion, where you have much more control, and you have much more control over the prompts and all of that stuff. So that's what I like about it. Let's actually look at how that works. Now, so Agency-Swarm, let's go ahead and install UV pip install Agency-Swarm. And so with Agency-Swarm, it does things a little differently. It uses the instructor library, and it uses it only with OpenAI. So with Crew, one of the things you could do with Crew is you can use it with other LLMs other than just OpenAI. But Agency-Swarm, it's opinionated in the sense that you can only use it with OpenAI, and it does not use it just as an OpenAI LLM or a chat completions call. It uses the Assistance API. Now, the Assistance API in OpenAI gives you a lot more capability, right? You can actually use this to train data. You can actually load existing data onto it. You can load prompts. You can load a bunch of stuff onto it. So it kind of limits the number of LLMs that you can use it with, which is basically just one, which is OpenAI. But I like Agency-Swarm simply because it does not try to be something it's not. It is focused on giving the best results in the least possible code. I think I like that approach personally in many ways, simply because it's just easy to work with, for me at least personally. I need to also install Exa because I need to build my own Exa tool. So in this case, what I'm going to do is I'm going to actually build my own Exa tool. So I have to install Exa. UV pip install Exa. So I'm going to install this UV pip install, which is this Python .in. I think that's already in there. Great. So you don't have to worry about this. We have this. Now let's look at our one agency.py. Okay. So now I'm going to close this and get started. So from Agency-Swarm import. I'm not sure what are the imports. Let's actually look at their documentation. Agency-Swarm. They actually have, their documentation is kind of sparse, which is what is kind of takes away from it. But they do have, it's pretty simple to get started with. So I just want to take these two things, which is obviously going to be important. So we have this. We are going to also pull in the thing, right? We also need the environment variables. So we have copy dot slash through. So we've copied that. So we don't need anything more. We have the environment variables here. And what we're going to do now is we're also going to import some of the other things that we need. I think we need a tool. We need to build our own tools in Agency-Swarm. So that should take a little bit of time, but hopefully not too much. We need the agent, and that's really it, and agency. So we need these things. So we'll just do from Agency-Swarm, import agency, agent, set OpenAI key, right? And from Agency-Swarm, import base tool. Is it base tool? Yeah, I think it's base tool. Yeah, I think it's base tool. Okay. And we also need the Pydantic field. Now, what I like about Agency-Swarm is that it uses instructor and Pydantic, which is great. It gives you a lot more control over your tools and the structure and what you can take in and all of that stuff. You can do all of that stuff. Now, let's actually write our tools. The first tool that we need to write is our tool to search for things, right? So we're going to use it for a search tool. We're going to call this base tool. We're going to use exa for this. So we're going to declare exa. So we're going to say from exa_py import exa, from .env import load.env, and we are going to initialize exa, or let's just call it search exa, and we are going to say API key is equal to os.env. This is perfect. Yes, this is what we want. We also need to import the OS. Right. Now, what we are going to do from this point on is we're going to write our search tool, and we are also going to set up our OpenAI API. So this is going to be set OpenAI. Yeah, so we got this. So we need to set it because Agency-Swarm needs to use OpenAI. This is already something that I brought up, right? So this is pretty straightforward. I'm going to set up, so for the search tool to work, it needs a particular field, right? The field that you need in this case is the search string, right? So I'm going to call this a string and say, is equal to field. Yeah, so this, we'll just give it a description. We don't need to worry too much about the title and all that stuff. Yeah, so let me just check if this is how you should use it. Let's actually see whether this is what. Okay, this is the field. Do something with this. Okay. It searches for this. Okay, great, perfect. Yeah, the search. Okay, the search string to use for the search. Okay, fair enough. Let's see whether that works. Maybe. Then we are going to define a run function. Now, a run function is basically what is happening when the tool runs. Now, this is, so if you look at the tools in CrewAI, we were largely using just the existing CrewAI tools or LangChain tools. Now, Agency-Swarm specifically tells you not to use LangChain tools. If you actually go into your advanced usage, he says, don't use LangChain tools simply because they're mostly, and if you look at his video, he's very opinionated about this. He says it is not recommended. It doesn't give you the same level of type checking, error correction, and tool descriptions. You can't use validations. This is nice, actually, especially if you're building real world stuff for production use cases. You want to do validation, stuff like that. And this does not, I mean, Agency-Swarm, I think, gives you better control over what the tool can do, which is also important, especially when you're getting into business use cases, when you want to add access controls and stuff like that. Right. So this is something he's recommending you not do with the tool. So, and he also gives you something called a shared state. I'm not going to use that in this case. So shared state, you can essentially pass data between different tools. You can use shared state. I'm not going to use that in this case because I have a pretty simple requirement. So what this is going to do, I'm going to use exa for this. I'm going to essentially say result exa search. Actually, let's just call this exa. Let's not call it search.search. It's exa.search and we are going to essentially have the search string that's going to be self.search string. This is what it's going to search for. It's going to be of type. I'm just going to use the neural search. So you have neural, you have different types of searches in Exa, sorry. And we're just going to use this. We're going to use the auto prompt so that it can give us more optimized results. Use auto prompt true. Shoot. And finally, we're not going to restrict it to the number of results. We're going to say text true, which is something that Exa has. So if you look at the Exa search functionality, it says number results. It gives you all of the stuff. It gives you the type. It gives you, yeah, you can add whatever you want to this. Category, you can use auto prompt, all of these things, right? So you can see that this keyword neural defaults to neural. Use auto prompt if true, convert into an Exa query, otherwise it does not. So Exa, I think, uses an auto prompt to kind of generate a much more optimized prompt for it to search for that specific string. And then what we're going to do is we are going to return this result. That's it. That's the tool. There's nothing fancy to this tool. Obviously, not every tool is going to be this simple, but this tool is pretty simple, right? So finally, this is the case. Now, another thing we need to do, I don't know whether Crew gave you a nice little tool to output it to a file. I don't know whether the Agency-Swarm gives you. Does it give you a response file? Gives you a files folder with that doesn't mean anything. I think that's an agent that it's going to be using. Okay, so path list directories with files for the agent associated with file. This is not really what I want. What I want is for it to just use, this is a thing I like about Crew, which I don't think it's there in Agency-Swarm. Although Agency-Swarm gives you a lot more control, you can have all your shared instructions, blah, 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 you can do all of those things. But I feel that Crew gives you the ability to just output things in files and stuff like that. I don't think this allows you to do that. You still need to, I think you have to still figure it out yourself. I think, yeah, report generator, for instance, let's see what this does. Schemas folder, files folder. I don't know whether it actually uses it to do that. The tools, I'm not sure whether, I'm just trying to see if it can generate that report. Request.post. File path, Smackdown report file should be, oh, okay. It seems to have it. Should be created or updated. Okay, it seems to have the ability to do that. Okay, with open, okay. File path where the markdown, where is it being used though? Where is file path being used? Okay, doesn't seem to be used. Okay, when you have a markdown file, only then this is used. Otherwise, this is strange. I don't know why they've not used it. Let's see whether they actually have with open call somewhere. Yeah, actually they seem to have got it here. So the tool essentially has this, and it is saving this as a base 64. Okay, base 64 screenshot. Okay, they've got a tool that seems to be okay. They have a bunch of tools that can do all of this stuff, which is pretty interesting. Get base 64 screenshot. WD. Okay, I think they're passing it on. Okay, this is actually something that's useful. So it gives me some ideas as to how to write it to a file, because sometimes it runs into encoding issues and I don't want that to happen. So file writer tool. Let's call this base tool. This is not needed, actually. I don't need almost any of this. I'm just going to remove. So this is going to be the data that I want. This is going to be the data to write to the file. Then I am going to base 64 that data and then decode it and write it to an actual file. So I'm going to say, this is because I sometimes run into these issues. Base 64. where you actually have some encoded file or some, some escaped character or something like that that will break something. So I want to do that, right? I want to be able to write this to a file. So first of all, I will take the data and B64 encoded data is equal to, yeah, so this dot encode or decode, yeah, this is perfect. So this is string. And then what I'm going to do, actually, I can, so I'm not going to XR write file with, and I need a file, output file, the file with open output file. I'm going to say B64 base 64 code 64 decode. This is taking in. This always messes me up. It takes a string, but it returns. Okay, okay, that's fine. I think we're good here. I think this should do it. Let's actually, and then say return data written to whatever output file. Okay, cool. So we have set up our tools. Now you see that our tools are actually not that complicated to set up, but really let's do our agency, because that's really what we want to do. We're not here to write basic Python code. We're actually here to build out an agency. So this is Agency-Swarm. Now let's actually go ahead and use the simplest example that they have here and kind of base it on that. So we've written our tools. We want to write our two agents, right? We have just two agents. So the first one is our manager agent. The second one is our researcher agent. That's what we're going to do. Okay, so the first one is a manager. This is our agent, and we will say that this agent has name, description, instruction, tools. Okay, so this is what we want. Name, description, instruction, tools. Okay. So we'll probably use three agents. One is a CEO, one is a developer, one is, in this case is manager, there's developer, we'll use manager, we'll probably use vulnerability researcher, then writer, probably use something like that. Or we can just use one in the same. I'm not sure whether we can do that. So we have, sorry about that again, name, description, instruction, and tools. Let's use the same things. Name is security manager. Let's just call it something. I mean, it doesn't really have to be a security manager. Description, we want to get a description for the security manager. So how do we write this? Responsible for communication, task planning, and management, and execute. Responsible for communication and task planning. Let's actually write that for communication and task planning. All right. This manager, since they are like a hierarchical agent, we don't really need to give them very specific instructions. You need to converse with the security researcher. Okay. Instructions. You need to converse with the security researcher and get the tasks done. Okay, so let's just say that this is the case. I'm not going to give the manager any tools. We're not going to give them any tools because they don't need any tools. They just need your typical GPT to get the job done. They don't need any specific tools at all for this to be done. I don't know whether Agency-Swarm requires you to set the type of model or where you can set the model. I'm sure it is there somewhere. Is it set an AI client? Yeah, maybe that's the one. So this would be new client. Okay, I think they're just using instructor patch new client. Not sure how that's going to work, but nevertheless, I'm going to leave this out this time. I'm just going to use whatever it's going to use by default. So let's use the security researcher agent. Name, description. Yeah, so we're going to change the description and the instructions. Responsible for creating stories and detailed specifications for intentional intentionally vulnerable apps that are used. Okay, again, this is a lot, but I'm just going to use it this way. Actually, let me just break this up. This is not very nice. So I'm going to just do this and break this up. Responsible for generating stories and specifications for intentionally vulnerable apps. These apps are used to train developers on secure and insecure code. The intentionally vulnerable apps need to have a simple, small, and simple functionalities. The apps, actually, I can probably put them in, okay, I can probably put these in the instructions, not here in the description of the agent. Yeah, so I can keep this here and open this up. And oh, I don't know why I just copied those and lost it. Okay. Oops. Generate stories and detailed specifications for intentionally vulnerable apps. These apps are, and this is also are used to train developers on insecure and secure code. It's important to give the context here as well, just a little bit. Simple functionalities, typically to demonstrate a single vulnerability. The apps need to have basic UI that is rendered through server-side templates. Yeah, that's fine. The app must also have a secure mode that to demonstrate the correct way to implement it. So yeah, we are essentially saying that we want both these things, and this is what we want. It has the search tool, and it also has the. I don't know whether we can do this. Whether we can just give the same researcher, both the search tool and the file write tool. Why not give them access to both? And do we need another agent? Is my question. Maybe we don't. Let's see. So we have two agents that we've created. And you'll see that the agents here, very similar to what we did, except that we don't need to write tasks. The idea is that using the assistants API, they will be able to, Agency-Swarm should be able to figure out the tasks themselves, right? So that is, I think, one of the cool things that I see with this. Okay, so now we are going to define our agency, right? So now we'll define our agency, and in here, there's a way to define the agencies. This is actually very interesting. So what they do here is that they kind of define the agency as a set of shared instructions, and you can create a hierarchy within the agency, which is kind of nice. So you can say the CEO, the manager can talk to a security researcher. And if you want the security researcher to talk to the manager again, then you can create another array to say that dev can talk to CEO or whatever. You can have a entire chaining of things that can happen. So in this case, since we're just two agents, I don't have much happening here. I'm going to essentially say this is why I hate this sometimes, where I have to deal with this. Yeah, I'm going to have the manager, and then I'm going to have the manager who is able to initiate communications with the security researcher, but not really get that much feedback from that standpoint. Just this, I just want an interaction top down. I don't want it bottom up again. I can do that. I can literally just add another array to say, security researcher manager, but I don't want to do that. I don't see the need for doing that. Shared instructions, you can give them shared files, because remember, this is different from how you use CrewAI. CrewAI, you're not using the assistance API. Here you're using the OpenAI assistance API. And because of that, you are able to write, it creates it as an OpenAI assistant, which means you can have shared files, you can have shared instructions, shared prompts, whatever it is. You are part, what have they mentioned here as an example? You are part of, okay. I'm not sure whether this is the only way to write it, of a security research and training agency. So yeah, this is what I have. All right. So now one of the things I'm going to do is I'm going to invoke this agency using the Gradio client. So I'm actually going to demo this with the Gradio client. Now Gradio is awesome simply because you can access it on a web application on the browser. So I can just literally communicate with it. Very nice. All right. So we've actually written our agent or an agency in this particular case. Let's go ahead and run this. Our one agency. Hopefully it should not throw a bunch of errors to start with. Let's see. Looks like it. Okay. Pip install Gradio. That's not too bad. So Gradio, this is again one of the things I like about this. It doesn't install things unnecessarily if it doesn't need to. It makes you install it only when you need to. That's nice. It doesn't require you to install a whole or import a whole bunch of LangChain tools or tools that you don't need, and the dependencies, the 1,000 dependencies that comes with the tools that you don't need. This is nice. Already have a lot more control over this, right? So it's going to upload. So if you see what's happening here, it's actually adding these assistants to my OpenAI Assistants API. So that's what's happening here. So that's really what it's doing. So instead of doing it in a typical way, it's actually accessing it through my assistants 7860. All right. So now generate. So let me actually write my instructions. So the last time when we used CrewAI, we used our CrewAI, we used our file shared instructions.md, but here I'm just going to type in the instructions. Generate a story and specifications for an app in PHP Laravel that is vulnerable to SSRF. After generating this, write the story and specification to a markdown file on the current working directory. So this is an additional instruction that I have to provide, simply because this doesn't have the output. I mean, it doesn't just have an output instruction that Crew has. So I think I need to give this as an additional thing. So what's happening now is that it should start to process. So it's going to first talk to the security manager, and the security manager is going to start executing the exa function, which is going to, so it says background, the app weather fetcher is this, blah, 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 intended functionality, PHP Laravel, so on and so forth. It says that it generates all of this. It generates the basic UI. It seems to have understood this. It seems to have understood the fact that it is vulnerable. We also need a secure implementation. We want some basic data related to this, basically related to the API, the conditions, all of that stuff. So it's saying, write it to a markdown on the current directory. I don't know whether it's going to be able to execute the function. Let's see whether it actually does. This is actually pretty impressive. It's not only fast, it's much faster than CrewAI. As you can see, it didn't hallucinate anywhere in the middle. It actually was able to do the job much, much faster than CrewAI. Data is written. Wow. this is amazing. This is really, really fast. Simply because it actually gave me what I wanted. It gave me a story, which is an actual app, and it gave me the intended functionality. It gave me the SSRF stuff. It gave me the features. It actually broke this down pretty impressively, and it pretty much used the same. I almost used the same set of parameters in Crew as I used with this, but I really like this simply because it was faster. It was way faster. It got it done in a few seconds. And not just that, I think because it was using the assistance API, it also was a lot more optimized in some reason. I think it used things that actually needed to use versus the other ones that don't use the assistance API that kind of just use they go with the interoperability because they need to use it with multiple LLMs. But this one kind of honed in on this. So I liked the fact that it did that. And I also like the fact that it gave me the secure mode. Of course, I had asked for it. And to be fair, in the Crew example, I had not. And this one it did. And it also added some relevant configurations. And this is great. This is exactly what I want. This is perfect. I don't need anything else. Clearly understood the base 64. I mean, it didn't understand the base 64 thing. I just handled it. It was a good thing I did because it would have definitely failed if it did not. Because there are a lot of escape characters here that would have failed. So the base 64 encode, base 64 decode went off perfectly. So I think this was really good. And it wrote it successfully. It even said, hey, you know what, story, blah, 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 has this great. And I like the fact that it has this Gradio demo, which makes it a lot easier for me to follow, put in instructions. I can also do that using a chat completions instruction if I want to, but this is really helpful. This is good. So I'm, like I said, I'm going to do 2 Smackdowns because it's literally been 90 minutes since we started. I see that we have a lot of people who've tuned in. Thank you so much for tuning in. Appreciate your time being spent on this. And yeah, I intend to do a lot more of these live code sessions like this, especially on AI. This is on my personal channel, so feel free to leave your comments if you want something else to be talked about next time. I'm largely looking to focus on AI and some of the new stuff that's happening around AI and LLMs. So if you want something, do share it with me, connect with me, and I'll be happy to cover this in another edition of a similar thing that I do, of a live code, live session that I do, a live stream. All right, thank you so much. Have a great morning, afternoon, evening, night, wherever you are. Thank you so much. Bye-bye.